My 15-year-old son Danny walked through the front door of our modest apartment last Sunday evening, and something was immediately wrong. His shoulders slumped forward like he was carrying invisible weight, his usual bright smile nowhere to be found. When he saw me sitting on our second-hand couch folding laundry from my latest electrical job, he crossed the room slowly and wrapped his arms around me in the kind of desperate hug that only comes from deep pain. Then he whispered 7 words that changed everything. They ate at a restaurant while I waited in the car for 3 hours. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need details. The raw hurt in his voice told me everything. I just grabbed my keys, drove straight to his mother, Sarah's boyfriend's house, walked through the unlocked front door, and found them laughing over expensive wine, completely unbothered by what they had done to my son. The massive dining room reeked of privilege and pretension. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across mahogany furniture that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Sarah sat at the head of an enormous table, wearing diamond earrings I'd never seen before. Her manicured fingers wrapped around a wine glass that caught the light like liquid gold. Across from her sat Richard Blackwood, her new boyfriend, a man whose tailored suit and smug expression screamed old money and entitlement. They looked up when I entered Sarah's face, shifting from surprise to defensive anger in seconds. Richard barely glanced at me, continuing to swirl his wine with the casual indifference of someone accustomed to being interrupted by lesser people. "Michael, what are you doing here?" Sarah's voice carried that sharp edge she'd developed since moving in with Richard. Gone was the warm tone I'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. You can't just walk into someone's home uninvited. Your son just told me you left him sitting in a car for 3 hours while you two enjoyed dinner at Le Bernardin. I kept my voice steady, though every instinct screamed at me to unleash the fury building in my chest. 3 hours, Sarah. A 15-year-old boy. Richard finally looked up, his pale blue eyes cold as winter morning. Children need to learn patience, Michael. Fine dining establishments aren't playgrounds. We were conducting important business discussions. Business discussions? I stepped closer to the table, my work boots silent on the plush Persian rug. What business requires abandoning a child in a parking lot? Sarah set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. Danny wasn't abandoned. He had his phone, the car was locked and safe. He's 15, not 5. Maybe if you stopped treating him like a baby, he'd be more mature. Mature enough to wait outside while his mother gorges herself on lobster. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but the image of Danny sitting alone in that car, watching other families walk by, ate at my soul. Richard stood smoothly, his 6-foot frame imposing in the dim light. I think you're overreacting, Michael. Children from working-class backgrounds often struggle to understand social norms. Perhaps Danny simply isn't ready for the lifestyle Sarah deserves. The casual cruelty of his words hit like a physical blow. This wasn't about Danny misbehaving or being immature. This was about class, about Richard's belief that my son didn't belong in their world of expensive restaurants and exclusive social circles. Nah, this isn't the first time, is it? I looked directly at Sarah, searching for any trace of the woman I'd once married. How many times have you left him behind because he didn't fit your new image? Sarah's composure cracked slightly, a flicker of guilt crossing her features before hardening into defiance. Danny needs to understand that relationships require compromise. I'm building a life with Richard, and that means making choices about what's appropriate. What's appropriate is treating your son like he matters. He does matter? Richard interrupted, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to controlling conversations. But Sarah and I are planning our future, and that future requires certain adjustments. Perhaps it's time to consider what's truly best for Danny's development. The way he said adjustments made my blood run cold. This wasn't about one incident at a restaurant. This was bigger, more calculated. "What kind of adjustments?" I demanded. Sarah glanced at Richard, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "I've been thinking that maybe Danny would benefit from spending less time between two households. All this back and forth is confusing for him. Maybe he'd be better off with more stability." "You're talking about changing custody." "I'm talking about what's best for our son," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Richard has resources, connections. He could provide Danny with opportunities you simply can't offer." Richard moved to a mahogany sideboard, withdrawing a manila folder with practiced ease. "As a matter of fact, Michael, I've been documenting some concerning patterns in Danny's behavior when he returns from your apartment. Anger defiance, resistance to proper social expectations." He opened the folder, revealing photographs and documents I couldn't quite see from my position. "My attorney has been reviewing the situation, and we're prepared to petition for a custody modification that better serves Danny's interests." The room tilted slightly as the full scope of their plan became clear. This hadn't been an impulsive decision to leave Danny in the car. This was part of a systematic effort to push him out of their lives entirely. "You're trying to take my son away from me." "We're trying to provide stability," Sarah said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Richard's connections could get Danny into private schools, summer programs, opportunities that I can't afford," I finished. "Because I'm just an electrician who lives in a 2-bedroom apartment instead of a mansion." Richard's smile was razor thin. "I'm glad you understand the situation clearly. Now I think it's best if you leave before we're forced to call security. Trespassing charges would certainly support our petition for supervised visitation only." The threat hung in the air like smoke from an electrical fire. They'd planned this confrontation, anticipated my reaction, and prepared legal weapons to use against me. But as I looked at Sarah sitting in her expensive clothes at her expensive table, I saw something Richard had missed. Fear. "There's something else, isn't there?" I asked quietly. "Something you haven't told me yet." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. Richard moved closer to her chair, placing a possessive hand on her shoulder. "Actually, Michael, there is one more thing." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Richard and I, we're expecting a baby, and we want Danny to understand that our new family needs to be our priority. It wouldn't be fair to divide our attention when we could be focusing on giving one child everything he deserves." The words hit like a sledgehammer to my chest. They weren't just trying to minimize Danny's presence in their lives. They were trying to erase him completely, to make room for their real child, their planned child, their perfect child who would never remind Richard that Sarah had a life before him. In that moment, standing in that opulent dining room surrounded by the trappings of wealth and power, I realized that my son's whispered words had revealed something far worse than simple neglect. This was the beginning of a war for Danny's future, and I was vastly outgunned. Richard's satisfaction was palpable as he watched my shock register. He'd orchestrated this entire confrontation, from my dramatic entrance to Sarah's carefully timed revelation about the pregnancy. Even the unlocked front door had been deliberate, ensuring I'd walk into their territory feeling righteous and angry, exactly what they needed for their cameras. The worst part was watching Uncle Tony's face redden with barely contained anger as he observed his brother-in-law's behavior. Uncle Tony had been my anchor after Mom died, the one person who consistently validated my feelings when family dynamics became toxic. Now he stood powerless to intervene without creating an even bigger scene. My blood turned to ice as I understood the trap. Every word, every gesture, every moment of anger had been captured. Richard had professional-grade surveillance equipment documenting what would look like an unstable ex-husband breaking into their home and threatening them. "You planned this." My phone buzzed with a text from the restaurant manager. "Mr. Gerard, we need to clarify the billing situation. Your father used your credit card information to change the decorations but claims this was a family emergency. Please confirm authorization. Sarah opened an elegant leather portfolio beside her plate, withdrawing a thick stack of photographs and documents. I've been documenting everything, Michael. The condition of your apartment, your old car, the neighborhood where you live. Danny comes home talking about bill collectors calling about you working late nights and weekends just to make rent. She spread the photos across the table like a dealer revealing a winning hand. Images of my modest two-bedroom apartment, my 15-year-old Honda Civic with its rust spots and dented bumper, even shots of me in my work clothes, leaving the apartment building early in the morning. Look at this objectively, Richard said, his voice taking on the practiced cadence of a seasoned manipulator. A child deserves stability, security, educational opportunities. I can provide private tutoring, college preparation internships at my company. What can you offer? Overtime hours and secondhand furniture? The casual cruelty of reducing my life to poverty porn made my hands shake with rage. But I forced myself to stay calm. Getting angry now would only give them more ammunition. Danny is happy with me. He's never complained about our apartment or my car. Of course he hasn't, Sarah said, and for the first time genuine emotion crept into her voice. Because you've taught him to be grateful for scraps. You've convinced him that struggling is noble, that wanting better things is somehow wrong. A door I hadn't noticed before opened, and a tall man in an expensive suit stepped into the room. Everything about him screamed legal authority, from his perfectly styled silver hair to his hand-tailored jacket that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Michael Thompson, I presume. His voice carried the smooth authority of courtroom experience. Marcus Wellington, senior partner at Wellington Hayes & Associates. I've been advising Richard and Sarah on this matter. He carried a briefcase in one hand and a manila envelope in the other, setting both on the table with practiced precision. I've prepared some preliminary documentation that I think you'll find enlightening. Wellington opened the envelope, withdrawing legal papers that he arranged in front of me like evidence at a trial. Petition for emergency custody modification based on documented pattern of instability and inability to provide adequate care. My mouth went dry as I scanned the documents. Statements from Sarah describing my explosive anger and concerning financial stress. Photographs of Danny looking tired or upset after visits to my apartment. Even a psychological evaluation form waiting to be completed by a doctor whose credentials filled half a page. You can't be serious? Deadly serious, Wellington replied. We have documentation spanning the past 6 months, showing a clear pattern of concerning behavior. Danny's grades dropping after particularly stressful weekends at your apartment. Reports from Sarah of him coming home agitated and angry, talking about how unfair life is for working people. Richard leaned back in his chair, supremely confident. The boy needs proper role models, Michael. He needs to see that success is possible, that hard work and smart decisions lead to prosperity. Instead, you're filling his head with victim mentality and class resentment. I'm teaching him that people matter more than money. Are you, Sarah's voice carried a sharp edge, because he comes home talking about how Richard and I are shallow, how we waste money on things that don't matter. He's 15 years old, Michael. He should be excited about opportunities, not bitter about other people's success. The accusations stung because they contained fragments of truth twisted into weapons. I had talked to Danny about the importance of character over wealth, about how some rich people forgot that money couldn't buy happiness or integrity. But I'd never taught him to resent success or to see himself as a victim. Wellington consulted his watch, a platinum piece that caught the light like a tiny sun. I should mention that Judge Patricia Morrison has already reviewed these preliminary documents. She's expressed significant concern about the current custody arrangement. Judge Morrison. The name meant nothing to me, but Wellington's smug confidence suggested it should. A family court judge who takes child welfare very seriously, Richard said. She also happens to be a member of my country club. We've had several conversations about the importance of stability in children's lives. The corruption was so blatant, it took my breath away. They weren't just using their wealth to hire better lawyers. They were using social connections to influence judges before any case even reached court. That's illegal. What's illegal? Wellington's smile was predatory. Two concerned citizens discussing child welfare at a social gathering. Judge Morrison and I have been friends for 15 years. She naturally expresses interest in cases involving people she knows. Sarah reached across the table, her fingers touching the pregnancy photo that had somehow appeared among the legal documents. Michael, this doesn't have to be adversarial. We're not trying to cut you out of Danny's life entirely. Supervised visits, structured contact, maybe summers when he's older. Generous terms. Richard added, considering the evidence we've compiled. Of course, any future contact would need to be conditional on your behavior. No more filling the boy's head with anti-success rhetoric. No more teaching him to resent the lifestyle his mother has chosen. They wanted me to disappear quietly, to accept being reduced to a supervised visitor in my own son's life while they created their perfect new family. The baby would grow up knowing Danny as a weekend obligation, a reminder of Sarah's previous life that was tolerated rather than welcomed. Wellington began gathering his papers with efficient movements. You have 72 hours to respond to these documents, Michael. I'd suggest consulting with an attorney, though I should warn you that family law is quite specialized. Most general practice lawyers lack the experience to handle complex custody modifications, especially when the opposing party has resources and connections, Richard added with mock sympathy. I understand your financial limitations make hiring quality representation challenging. The message was crystal clear. They had money connections and a plan. I had work boots and a checking account that barely covered rent. In their minds, the outcome was inevitable. But as I looked at Sarah sitting in her designer clothes at her boyfriend's table, I noticed something Wellington and Richard had missed. Her hands shook slightly as she held her wine glass. Her eyes darted between the legal documents and the door as if she was calculating escape routes. And when she thought neither man was watching her face, showed something that gave me hope. Doubt. There's something else you should know, Michael. Sarah's voice was barely audible, as if speaking the words might make them more real. Richard he's been helping me understand how your influence on Danny could affect our new baby. Children model the behavior they see. And if Danny continues to absorb your attitudes about success and wealth, she trailed off, but the implication was clear. This wasn't just about custody of Danny. This was about completely severing any connection between my son and their new family, ensuring that my values, my perspective, my very existence wouldn't contaminate their perfect world. Richard stood smoothing his jacket with satisfied precision. I think we've covered everything we need to tonight. Michael, I trust you'll give serious consideration to what's truly best for Danny, and for your own future interactions with this family. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Accept their terms or face consequences that would extend far beyond family court. Richard had resources and connections I couldn't match, and he was willing to use them to destroy anyone who threatened his carefully constructed life. As I turned to leave, surrounded by evidence of their wealth and power, one thought burned in my mind with crystalline clarity. Danny had trusted me enough to whisper his pain, to share the devastating truth about being abandoned in that car. He was counting on me to fight for him, to protect him from people who saw him as an obstacle to their happiness. They'd planned this confrontation perfectly, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that being outgunned meant being defeated. They'd forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The drive home felt endless. My hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles had gone white. Every traffic light seemed to mock me with its deliberate slowness. Every luxury car that passed reminded me of the resources Richard could deploy against us. By the time I pulled into our apartment complex, the weight of their legal threats had settled into my bones, like winter cold. Danny was waiting on our small balcony when I climbed the stairs to our second-floor unit. He'd changed into his favorite worn jeans and the NASA t-shirt I'd bought him for his birthday last year, looking smaller and more vulnerable than his 15 years should allow. The moment he saw my face, his own expression crumpled. "Dad, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have told you. Now they're going to be even madder at me." "No." I pulled him into a fierce hug, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo and teenage boy sweat. "You did exactly right by telling me. This isn't your fault, Danny. None of this is your fault." We settled on our second-hand couch, the same one where he'd whispered his devastating truth just hours earlier. Now, in the safety of our modest living room with its second-hand furniture and family photos, Danny's composed facade finally shattered. It wasn't just the restaurant, Dad. It's been happening for months. Tears streamed down his face as words poured out like water through a broken dam. "They take me places, but I have to wait outside. Country clubs, business dinners, parties at their friends' houses. Richard says kids don't belong in adult spaces, that I need to learn my place." Each revelation felt like another knife to my chest. "What else, son? Tell me everything." Richard makes fun of our apartment when Mom isn't listening. He calls you the electrician, like it's something dirty. And Mom, she just stands there and lets him. Sometimes she even laughs. Danny wiped his nose on his sleeve, a gesture so young and heartbreaking that I had to swallow hard to keep my own composure. They talk about me like I'm not even there. About how much easier things would be when the new baby comes about. How I'll understand that I can't be the center of attention anymore. The casual cruelty of their conversations horrified me, but something else caught my attention. "Danny, when they have these conversations, where are you?" "Usually in the next room or in the car or waiting outside wherever we are." They think I can't hear them, but I can. I always can. An idea began forming in my mind, dangerous but potentially powerful. "Do you still have that phone we got you for emergencies?" Danny nodded, pulling the device from his pocket. It was nothing fancy, just a basic smartphone with a good camera and decent memory, but it might be enough. "I need to ask you something, and you can say no if it makes you uncomfortable. But if they're saying these things when they think you can't hear them, maybe we should make sure someone can." Danny's eyes widened as he understood what I was suggesting. "You want me to record them?" "Only if you feel safe doing it. Only if you think you can do it without getting caught. I won't ask you to put yourself in danger." He considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I think I can do it. They never pay attention to what I'm doing anyway. I'm like furniture to them." The bitter resignation in his voice broke my heart, but it also strengthened my resolve. Richard and Sarah had underestimated Danny, dismissing him as a child who couldn't understand their adult machinations. That dismissal might become their downfall. "There's something else I need to do," I said, reaching for my own phone. "I'm going to call Jake." Jake Morrison had been my squad leader in Afghanistan, a military police investigator who'd saved my life during our second deployment. After we'd both gotten out, he'd started a private investigation business specializing in corporate fraud and family law cases. More importantly, he owed me a favor that went back to a roadside bomb and a decision I'd made to shield him from shrapnel. "Jake, it's Michael. I need help." "Michael, good to hear from you. What's the situation?" I explained everything from Danny's revelation about the restaurant to the legal ambush at Richard's house. Jake listened without interrupting his military training, evident in his focused attention. "This guy Richard, what's his last name?" "Blackwood. Richard Blackwood, some kind of real estate mogul?" "Blackwood." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Michael, I think I know this guy by reputation. High-end commercial real estate major donor to local political campaigns. If he's who I think he is, he's got serious juice in this city. So we're screwed." Maybe not. Guys with that kind of profile often have skeletons they're desperate to keep buried. Give me 24 hours to run some background checks. In the meantime, keep Danny safe and document everything. After hanging up, I sat with Danny and we planned how he could safely record conversations without arousing suspicion. We practiced with the phone's recording app, figuring out how to start and stop it quickly, how to position it to capture clear audio without being obvious. Dad, what if this doesn't work? What if they really can take me away from you? I looked at my son, this brave kid who'd endured months of emotional abuse and still had the courage to trust me with his pain. Then we'll figure out something else. But Danny, I want you to know something. No matter what happens, no matter what any judge or lawyer says, you are my son and I love you. That will never change. I love you too, Dad. The next evening, Jake called back with news that made my blood run cold and my hopes soar simultaneously. Michael, your instincts were right. Richard Blackwood is bad news, but not in the way you might expect. Jake's voice carried the grim satisfaction of a hunter who'd found his prey's trail. I talked to a contact of mine who handles divorce cases for wealthy clients. Blackwood has a pattern. What kind of pattern? He targets women with children from previous relationships, particularly women who are vulnerable or isolated. He uses his wealth and connections to systematically separate them from their kids. Then, when the relationship is solid and the children are out of the picture, he starts the real psychological abuse. The room seemed to tilt around me. You're saying Sarah is a victim too? I'm saying Sarah might not be the enemy you think she is. I tracked down Richard's ex-wife, Patricia Blackwood. She divorced him 3 years ago, lost custody of her daughter in the process. She's agreed to meet with you. When? Tomorrow night. But Michael, there's more. Patricia saved evidence recordings documents that show Richard's pattern of manipulation and control. She's been waiting for someone else to come forward. Someone with the courage to expose him. Hope flickered in my chest like a candle in wind. What kind of evidence? The kind that could destroy him if it ever saw the inside of a courtroom. But Patricia will only share it if she believes you're serious about fighting, not just complaining. Can you meet her tomorrow at 7? There's a coffee shop called Murphy's on 5th Street. I'll be there. After hanging up, I found Danny in his room staring at his phone with an expression of mixed fear and determination. Dad, I got something. He played back a recording from earlier that day. Sarah's voice was clear and unmistakable, talking to Richard about managing the Danny situation and how the new baby would help her finally move forward from that chapter of her life. Richard's response was even more damning, discussing how children from previous relationships were always complications that required careful handling. There's more, Danny whispered. A lot more. As I listened to my ex-wife and her boyfriend casually discuss erasing my son from their lives, I realized that Jake might be right about Sarah. Her voice carried a hollow quality, as if she was reciting lines someone else had written for her. There were pauses, hesitations, moments where she seemed to be waiting for approval before continuing. Danny, tomorrow I'm meeting with someone who might be able to help us, someone who's been through what we're going through. With Richard? With Richard. Danny nodded slowly, then looked up at me with eyes that seemed far older than his 15 years. Dad, what if Mom doesn't want to be saved? What if she really does want to get rid of me? It was the question I'd been dreading, the possibility that kept me awake at night staring at the ceiling. What if Sarah's transformation wasn't just about Richard's manipulation? What if she genuinely preferred her new life, without the complications of co-parenting and shared custody? Then we'll deal with that too, I said finally, but let's find out the truth first. The next evening couldn't come fast enough. As I drove toward Murphy's coffee shop, I carried with me Danny's recordings, my own growing file of evidence, and the desperate hope that Patricia Blackwood held the key to saving my son from a man who collected broken families like trophies. Murphy's coffee shop occupied the corner of 5th and Main, like a beacon of normalcy, in a world that had tilted sideways. The smell of roasted beans and fresh pastries created a comforting contrast to the fluorescent sterility of Richard's mansion, or the clinical coldness of Wellington's legal documents. I arrived 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table where I could watch the door while appearing to read a newspaper. Patricia Blackwood entered exactly at 7, and I recognized her immediately from the careful way she scanned the room before moving. She was smaller than I'd expected, probably 5 feet 4 inches, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her clothes spoke of someone who'd once had money, but now chose simplicity: well-made jeans, a cream-colored sweater, and boots that had seen actual use. Michael. Her handshake was firm, her green eyes direct and intelligent. Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you'd actually show up. Why wouldn't I? Because most people don't want to hear what I have to say about Richard. It's easier to believe that women like your ex-wife are willing participants rather than victims. She settled into the chair across from me, declining my offer to buy coffee. Jake says you have recordings. I slid Danny's phone across the table. Patricia listened to 3 different conversations, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When the recordings finished, she sat back with a sigh that seemed to carry years of pain. It's exactly what he did to me: the systematic isolation, the financial control, the gradual erosion of my relationship with Emma. Her voice caught slightly on her daughter's name. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd already poisoned Emma against me. She was only 12, but she believed his version of reality completely. What version? That I was unstable, jealous of his success, trying to sabotage their happiness because I couldn't accept that he was a better parent than me. Patricia pulled a tablet from her purse, opening a folder filled with documents and audio files. The thing about Richard is that he's incredibly patient. He spends months, sometimes years, building the foundation for his psychological campaigns. She showed me photos of Richard's previous relationships, a parade of women who'd all followed the same pattern. Successful, independent women with children from previous marriages, gradually isolated from their support systems and made financially dependent on Richard's generosity. How many women? That I can prove 5, including your Sarah, but I suspect there are more who never came forward. Patricia opened an audio file labeled Emma Session 3. This is my daughter talking to a therapist Richard chose. Listen carefully to how he's coached her responses. Emma's young voice filled the small space between us, describing her mother as angry all the time and jealous of Daddy Richard's success. But there were inconsistencies in her story, moments where she seemed to be reciting rather than remembering, pauses where she appeared to be waiting for approval from someone off camera. He recorded therapy sessions. He recorded everything. Richard is obsessive about documentation, but his compulsion to control every narrative is also his weakness. He keeps evidence of his own manipulation because he believes it proves his version of events. Patricia scrolled to another file, this one labeled Financial Records Emma Trust. The screen showed bank statements and investment accounts worth over $2 million, all in Emma's name, but controlled by Richard as trustee. He established trust funds for all the children, always positioning himself as the responsible adult, managing their inheritance. The biological fathers become obstacles to the children's financial security, and eventually the children come to see them as threats to their future prosperity. The scope of Richard's manipulation was staggering. He wasn't just stealing children from their fathers, he was purchasing their loyalty with money their fathers could never match. Patricia, how did you get all this evidence? Richard's fatal flaw is his arrogance. He documented everything because he genuinely believed his approach was not only legal, but morally superior. He kept recordings, financial records, even therapy notes, because he saw them as proof of his enlightened parenting philosophy. She opened another folder, this one containing building permits and inspection reports. But Richard's control issues extend beyond family relationships. His construction business cuts corners, constantly bribing inspectors and using substandard materials to maximize profits. You have proof of that? I have proof of that. Patricia's smile was grim but satisfied. Jake suggested we coordinate our efforts, combine what you're gathering about the custody case with what I've collected about Richard's business practices. She handed me a flash drive. Copies of everything: financial records, recordings, building inspection bribes, even evidence that Richard has been systematically evading taxes through shell companies registered in Delaware. Why are you giving this to me? Why not use it yourself? Patricia's expression softened with something that might have been hope. Because Emma is 17 now, and she's starting to ask questions about why her mother disappeared from her life so completely. Richard's control is beginning to slip as she gets older and more independent, but she won't listen to me directly, not after years of his programming. What does that have to do with Danny? If we can expose Richard's pattern with your family, if we can prove in court that he systematically manipulates these relationships, it creates legal precedent for Emma's case. More importantly, it might help her understand that her mother never abandoned her willingly. I studied Patricia's face, looking for any sign of hidden agenda or manipulation. All I saw was a mother's desperate love for a daughter who'd been taught to hate her. There's something else, Patricia continued. Jake's background check revealed that Judge Morrison, the family court judge Richard mentioned, has received substantial donations to her re-election campaign from companies Richard controls. That's not just influence peddling, that's potential judicial corruption. Can we prove it? Jake is working on that. But Michael, we need to be careful. Richard has destroyed lives before when people threatened his carefully constructed world. He has resources and connections that most of us can't even imagine. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text from Danny. Emergency? Richard showed up at school today during lunch, tried to take me to discuss my attitude problem. Principal stopped him, but he's threatening to involve Child Protective Services. My blood turned to ice. He's escalating. Patricia read the message over my shoulder, her face grim. This is how it starts. Richard creates crises that force immediate responses, then uses those responses as evidence of instability. If you rush to the school, he'll claim you're paranoid. If you don't respond immediately, he'll say you're neglectful. What do I do? Document everything. Call the school, get their version of events in writing. Then we accelerate our timeline. Patricia stood gathering her materials with practiced efficiency. Jake has contacts at the FBI who handle public corruption cases. If we can connect Richard's family court manipulation to his business crimes, we might be able to get federal investigators involved. The FBI, tax evasion, bribery of public officials using the judicial system to commit fraud. These aren't family court matters anymore, Michael. This is a federal case waiting to happen. As we prepared to leave Murphy's coffee shop, Patricia grabbed my arm with surprising strength. There's one more thing you need to know. Sarah called me 2 weeks ago. The words hit like a physical blow. She found my number, somehow called crying, asking about what it was like to lose a child to Richard's manipulation. She's scared, Michael. She knows what's happening, but she doesn't know how to stop it without losing everything. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Because I wanted to see if you were serious about fighting, not just trying to win Sarah back. But now I think she might be ready to help us expose Richard if we can guarantee her and the baby's safety. The revelation changed everything. Sarah wasn't just Richard's willing accomplice, she was another victim, trapped in his web of financial control and psychological manipulation. But if Patricia was right, if Sarah was ready to fight back, then Richard had made his first serious mistake. He'd underestimated the power of a mother's love and a father's desperation when they finally decided to work together instead of against each other. The call came at 11:30 that night, Sarah's voice barely a whisper, through tears that sounded like they'd been falling for hours. "Michael, please don't hang up. I need to talk to you." I'd been sitting at my kitchen table reviewing Patricia's evidence files and trying to process the federal scope of Richard's criminal enterprise. Danny was asleep in his room, exhausted from a day of fielding questions about Richard's unexpected school visit and the rumors it had generated among his classmates. "Sarah, what's wrong? Are you hurt? Can you meet me somewhere? Somewhere Richard won't find us?" "I can't do this anymore, Michael. I can't keep pretending that what we're doing to Danny is okay." 20 minutes later, I found her in the parking lot of our old church, the place where we'd been married 12 years earlier when we both believed love could conquer anything. Sarah sat in her BMW, still wearing the expensive clothes that had become her uniform, but her perfect makeup had been destroyed by tears, and her carefully styled hair hung limp around her shoulders. She climbed into my Honda without speaking, and for a moment, we just sat in the darkness, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. When she finally looked at me, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with underneath the sophisticated veneer Richard had constructed. "He has cameras everywhere," she whispered. "In the house, in my car, even in my purse. He says it's for security, but I know he's watching me, listening to my phone calls, reading my messages, tracking everywhere I go." "Sarah, how long has this been going on?" "Since I moved in with him. At first I thought it was sweet, like he was being protective, but then it became suffocating. I can't have lunch with friends without him questioning who I talked to and what we discussed. I can't buy anything without him reviewing the receipts. I can't even talk to Danny privately without Richard demanding to know what we said." She pulled a small device from her purse, something that looked like a lipstick case, but with a tiny antenna. "This is how he tracks me, GPS locator sewn into the lining. I only found it last week when I was looking for aspirin." The level of surveillance was staggering, but it explained Sarah's transformation from the independent woman I'd married into the carefully controlled person I'd confronted at Richard's dinner table. "What about the pregnancy?" Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, and for the first time since she'd started talking, genuine emotion crossed her face. "I wanted this baby so much. After our marriage ended after the divorce, I thought maybe having another child would help me feel whole again. But Richard, he talks about the baby like it's his property, like Danny is competition for resources that should belong to his biological child." "Is that why you agreed to change custody?" "I never agreed to anything." The words exploded from her with such force that she immediately looked around nervously as if Richard might materialize from the shadows. "Michael, he told me you were planning to take Danny away completely. He showed me documents, legal papers, that said you were going to petition for full custody and try to prove I was an unfit mother." My stomach dropped as I understood another layer of Richard's manipulation. "Sarah, I never filed any such papers. I never even threatened to change custody. But he had documents with your name on them, official-looking papers from a law firm." "Forged," I said quietly. "He created fake legal documents to make you believe I was attacking you, so you'd turn to him for protection." Sarah stared at me for a long moment, then covered her face with her hands as the full scope of Richard's deception became clear. "Oh God, what have I done? What have I done to Danny?" "You've been manipulated by someone with more experience and resources than either of us could imagine. Sarah, there are other women, other families he's done this to. We're not the first." I told her about Patricia, about Emma, about the pattern of psychological abuse disguised as enlightened parenting. With each revelation, Sarah's composure crumbled further until she was sobbing with the desperate grief of someone who'd discovered they'd been living in an elaborate lie. "He made me believe that loving you and Danny was holding me back from the life I deserved. He convinced me that good mothers put their children's financial future ahead of their emotional needs. He said that staying close to you was teaching Danny to accept mediocrity instead of striving for excellence." "And you believed him?" "I wanted to believe him." Sarah's honesty was brutal, but necessary. "Michael, Our marriage ended because we wanted different things. You were happy with your electrical work and our small apartment and Sunday afternoons at the park. I wanted more. I wanted security and nice things and opportunities for Danny that we couldn't afford. So when Richard offered you that life, I convinced myself that what was good for me would be good for Danny too. That having a stepfather with resources and connections would give him advantages you couldn't provide. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara further. But he doesn't want to be Danny's stepfather. He wants Danny to disappear so he can pretend I never had a life before him. We sat in silence for several minutes, processing the weight of Richard's systematic destruction of our family. Finally, Sarah spoke again, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. There's something else you need to know. Richard has been recording our sessions with Dr. Phillips, the family therapist. He told me it was for insurance purposes, but I found the recordings on his computer. He's been editing them, cutting out parts where Danny talks about missing you, or where I express doubts about the custody changes. Editing them making it sound like Danny is angry with you all the time, like I'm completely committed to reducing your visitation. He plans to use them as evidence in court. Sarah reached into her purse again, pulling out a small digital recorder. But I've been making my own recordings. Real ones, unedited conversations where Danny talks about how much he loves you and how scared he is about losing you. Hope flickered in my chest like a match in darkness. Sarah, would you be willing to testify about what Richard has been doing to help expose his pattern of manipulation? Michael, I'm pregnant and financially dependent on him. If I cross Richard, I lose everything. The house, the security, the medical care for the baby. I don't even have my own bank account anymore. He closed it last month and put everything into joint accounts that he controls. What if we could guarantee your safety? What if we could prove that Richard is committing crimes that go beyond family manipulation? Sarah looked at me with something that might have been hope. What kind of crimes? I told her about the tax evasion, the construction fraud, the bribes to building inspectors, and campaign donations designed to influence judges. Sarah listened with growing amazement as she realized that Richard's need to control every aspect of his world extended far beyond his personal relationships. He showed me spreadsheets, once financial documents for his businesses. I didn't understand most of it, but there were payments labeled as consulting fees that seemed strange. Thousands of dollars going to companies with names that didn't sound real. Do you think you could access those files again? Maybe. He keeps his home office locked, but I know the combination to his safe. He made me memorize it in case of emergency, said I needed to be able to access important documents if something happened to him. The irony was perfect. Richard's compulsive need to control every detail had given Sarah access to the evidence that could destroy him. His arrogance had convinced him that she was too dependent and grateful to ever betray him. Sarah, there's something I need you to understand. If we do this, if we expose Richard, your life is going to change dramatically. You'll lose the financial security, the house, probably everything he's given you. I know. Her voice was quiet but steady. But I'll get my son back. And maybe my daughter will have a chance to grow up with a mother who isn't afraid of her own shadow. Daughter? Sarah smiled for the first time since climbing into my car. The ultrasound last week. It's a girl. Richard wants to name her something sophisticated European, but I want to call her Hope. As we sat in that church parking lot where we'd once promised to love each other through everything life could throw at us, I realized that Richard had made his most crucial mistake. He'd assumed that isolating Sarah from her support system would make her completely dependent on him. Instead, it had shown her the difference between love and control, between partnership and ownership. Sarah, we're going to get our family back. Not the way it was, but something better. Something honest. Are you sure we can beat him? I thought about Danny's courage in recording those conversations about Patricia's years of patient evidence gathering about Jake's federal contacts and Sarah's access to Richard's criminal files. I'm sure we're going to try. The next morning, Richard's carefully constructed world began to crumble when Sarah walked into his home office and started photographing every document in his safe. But none of us were prepared for what happened when Richard came home early and found her there. The photographs Sarah took from Richard's safe revealed a criminal enterprise that stretched far beyond family court manipulation. Bank records from Cayman Island accounts, contracts with building inspectors that were clearly bribes disguised as consulting fees, and most damning of all, a detailed spreadsheet tracking payments to judges, social workers, and court officials across 3 counties. Jake had assembled a war room in his downtown office, transforming the conference table into a command center covered with evidence files, photographs, and legal documents. Patricia brought her recordings and financial records, Sarah provided Richard's business files, and Danny contributed his growing collection of secretly recorded conversations. "This is bigger than we thought," Jake said, pointing to a flow chart he'd created showing Richard's network of corruption. "He's been systematically compromising family court proceedings for at least 5 years, maybe longer. We're looking at federal racketeering charges, tax evasion, judicial corruption, and fraud. But our evidence gathering had attracted dangerous attention." Sarah called me at 6 in the morning, her voice tight with panic. "Michael, Richard knows. He came home early yesterday and caught me in his office. I told him I was looking for insurance papers for the baby, but he didn't believe me. He's been watching me even more closely, and this morning he told me he's accelerating the custody petition." "What does that mean?" "Emergency hearing this Friday? His lawyer filed papers claiming you've been coaching Danny to make false accusations that you're trying to poison him against his mother and our new family. They're asking for immediate suspension of your visitation, pending a full psychological evaluation." My hands shook as I absorbed the implications. If Richard succeeded in getting an emergency order, I might not see Danny again until the case was resolved, which could take months or even years, given Richard's connections and resources. "There's more," Sarah continued. "He's arranged for Danny to stay at a boarding school starting Monday. Says it's for his own protection while the adults sort out their problems. Michael, if Danny goes to that school, Richard will control every aspect of his life. I'll lose him completely." Jake had been listening to our conversation on speakerphone, and his military training was evident in his rapid response. "Sarah, we need those office files copied and transmitted to federal authorities today. Can you get back into his office?" He changed the safe combination and installed additional cameras. But there might be another way. Sarah's voice carried new determination. "He keeps backup files in his car's GPS system, financial records he reviews during his commute. The car is parked in our garage right now while he's at a business breakfast." "That's too dangerous," I protested. "If he catches you?" "If I don't try, we lose Danny forever," Sarah interrupted. "And my daughter grows up thinking her mother abandoned her half-brother because he wasn't good enough for our family." While Sarah attempted to access Richard's car files, Jake activated the federal investigation he'd been preparing. His contact at the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, Special Agent Lisa Rodriguez, had been reviewing our evidence package for 48 hours and was ready to move. "Rodriguez says they can get surveillance warrants based on the tax evasion evidence alone," Jake reported. "But they need 48 hours to coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office. The family court hearing is in 36 hours. So we're too late." "Not necessarily." Jake's smile was grimly satisfied. "I've been working on a parallel strategy with local media. Channel 7's investigative reporter Tom Mitchell has been looking into family court corruption for months. If we can give him enough evidence to run a story before the hearing, Richard will have him shut down. You said yourself that he has connections everywhere." "He has connections in local political circles and family court. He doesn't own the federal government or investigative journalism." Mitchell's story focuses on the pattern of judicial corruption, using our case as one example among several. Even if Richard manages to delay or discredit our specific allegations, the broader investigation will continue. Patricia had been quietly reviewing financial documents while we planned our media strategy. Suddenly, she looked up with an expression of shocked recognition. Michael, look at this. She pointed to a bank transfer record from Richard's files. 3 weeks ago, Richard moved $200,000 from his business account to an offshore holding company. But look at the timing. The transfer had occurred the day after Sarah first contacted Patricia, the same day Richard had announced his intention to accelerate the custody proceedings. He's preparing to flee, Jake said immediately, moving assets offshore, accelerating legal proceedings to establish custody before disappearing with both Sarah and the children. That's insane. He can't just kidnap people. He can if he establishes legal custody first, Patricia said grimly. Emma told me he's been talking about extended vacations to his house in Costa Rica. If he gets emergency custody of Danny and maintains psychological control over Sarah, he could disappear for months while fighting extradition. The scope of Richard's planning was terrifying, but it also revealed his desperation. He wasn't just fighting to win a custody case anymore, he was fighting to escape the consequences of years of criminal activity. We need to move faster, Jake decided. Rodriguez, the media story, and a direct confrontation with Richard all happening simultaneously create so much pressure from so many directions that he can't control the narrative. What kind of direct confrontation? Jake's smile was predatory. Sarah still has access to the house. What if she invited Richard to discuss their future plans, recorded the conversation where he reveals his true intentions, and we make sure that recording reaches the right people at exactly the right time? You're asking her to put herself and her baby at risk. I'm asking her to choose between temporary risk and permanent destruction of her family, Jake corrected. Because make no mistake, Michael, if Richard wins this round, Sarah and both children disappear from your life forever. That evening, Sarah called Richard from Jake's office while we recorded the conversation. She told him she was ready to commit fully to their relationship, to cutting ties with me permanently in exchange for security and protection for both children. Richard's response revealed everything we needed. He detailed his offshore accounts, his plans to relocate the family to Costa Rica, temporarily, while legal matters were resolved, and most damning of all, his strategy for using Danny's psychological dependency to ensure Sarah's cooperation. The boy needs to understand that his mother chose a better life. Richard's voice was clear through the recording equipment. Once he accepts that his biological father was holding all of us back, he'll be grateful for the opportunities I can provide. Children are remarkably adaptable when they understand the consequences of resistance. What consequences? Sarah's voice was steady, but I could see her hands shaking. Financial insecurity, legal troubles for his father, difficulty obtaining scholarships or college admissions. I have extensive connections in educational and professional circles, Sarah. I can open doors or close them depending on the child's attitude toward our family. The casual blackmail was damning evidence, but Richard wasn't finished. Of course, if the boy proves unable to adapt, there are excellent boarding schools in Europe that specialize in difficult children. Sometimes physical distance is necessary for psychological adjustment. By the time the conversation ended, we had recorded evidence of Richard's plans to flee the country, his systematic blackmail of children and ex-partners, and his intention to use financial coercion to control Danny's future opportunities. That's kidnapping, conspiracy, extortion, and violation of custody orders, Jake said with satisfaction. Rodriguez can move for immediate arrest warrants based on flight risk alone. But Richard had one final surprise waiting for us. The next morning, as federal agents prepared to execute search warrants on his home and office, Richard made his own preemptive move. He filed emergency papers claiming Sarah was having a psychological breakdown, that she'd been making wild accusations about his business practices and threatening to harm herself and their unborn child. His corrupt judge connections moved with surprising speed, issuing temporary protective orders that gave Richard temporary custody of both Sarah and Danny, while the adults received mandatory psychiatric evaluation. He's using the system against itself, Patricia realized. Claiming that our investigation is evidence of Sarah's instability, that exposure to our conspiracy theories is endangering her mental health and therefore the pregnancy. The legal trap was elegant and vicious. Richard had turned our evidence gathering into proof of harassment, our coordination into evidence of conspiracy, our preparation into indication of obsessive behavior. Worse, he'd done it through emergency orders that would take weeks to challenge properly. But Richard had made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that federal authorities would respect local court orders and wait for proper jurisdictional resolution before acting on criminal charges. Special Agent Rodriguez had different ideas about the relationship between federal law enforcement and corrupt local judges. The federal raid began at dawn on Thursday morning, just 18 hours before Richard's emergency custody hearing was scheduled to begin. Rodriguez had coordinated with the U.S. Attorney's Office to execute simultaneous search warrants on Richard's home office construction sites and known associates while freezing his domestic and offshore accounts pending investigation. I was in Jake's office reviewing our final legal strategy when the call came. Sarah's voice was shaking, but determined as she described federal agents swarming through Richard's mansion with boxes of evidence. They found everything, Michael. Not just financial records, but recordings Richard made of his conversations with judges, social workers, even therapy sessions with other people's children. He documented his own crimes because he was so convinced he was untouchable. Richard's compulsive need to control every narrative had finally destroyed him. His detailed records of bribes, blackmail, and family manipulation provided federal prosecutors with a roadmap to a criminal enterprise that spanned multiple jurisdictions and affected dozens of families. But the morning's events were just the beginning. Channel 7's investigative report aired at noon, featuring interviews with Patricia, evidence from our investigation, and statements from other victims who'd remained silent until they realized they weren't alone. The story revealed a pattern of judicial corruption that reached deep into the family court system, with Richard as the central figure in a network of wealth and influence that had been systematically destroying families for years. Judge Morrison, the family court judge who'd been prepared to rule in Richard's favor, recused herself from all pending cases pending an investigation into her campaign finances. Wellington's law firm released a statement distancing themselves from Richard's personal legal troubles and dropping him as a client. By Thursday evening, Richard's carefully constructed world had collapsed completely. Federal agents had seized his construction business, frozen his assets, and issued arrest warrants for tax evasion, racketeering, and conspiracy to defraud the court system. More importantly for our immediate situation, his emergency custody petition had been dismissed when his corrupt connections abandoned him. The confrontation I'd been anticipating came Friday morning when Richard arrived at Jake's office demanding to speak with Sarah. Federal agents had released her from protective custody after establishing that Richard's claims of psychological instability were part of his manipulation campaign. She was staying at a safe house while prosecutors prepared charges, but she'd insisted on being present when Richard finally faced the consequences of his actions. "You people have no idea what you've done," Richard snarled as he stormed into the conference room where we'd been meeting with prosecutors. "You've destroyed a family, robbed a child of opportunities you could never provide, and for what? To satisfy your own inadequacies." Even facing federal charges and the collapse of his criminal enterprise, Richard remained convinced that he was the victim, that our resistance to his control was evidence of our moral failure rather than his crimes. "The only thing we've destroyed is your ability to hurt children," Sarah replied quietly. "Danny is going home with his father today. Our daughter will grow up knowing her mother chose love over money. And Emma might finally understand why her mother really disappeared from her life. Emma is perfectly happy with the life I've provided for her. Emma is 17 years old and asking questions about financial records she found in her trust account," Patricia interjected. "Questions about why her college fund contains money that was supposed to go to building inspectors and court officials. She's not a child anymore, Richard. She's old enough to understand what you really are." Richard's composure finally cracked, as he realized that his control over Emma was slipping just as dramatically as his grip on everything else. "You can't turn her against me. I'm the only stable parent she's ever known." "No," Patricia said firmly. "You're the person who stole her mother and convinced her it was for her own good. But children grow up, Richard. They develop independent thinking. And eventually they figure out the difference between love and manipulation." The federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney James Chen, had been quietly observing our confrontation while reviewing evidence files. Now he looked up with the grim satisfaction of someone about to close a case that had consumed months of investigation. "Mr. Blackwood, you have the right to remain silent. You're under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States tax evasion racketeering and violations of the Hobbs Act related to judicial corruption." As federal agents led Richard away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine hope for the future. The legal resolution took several more weeks, but the outcome exceeded our most optimistic expectations. Richard's guilty plea on federal charges resulted in an 8-year prison sentence and full restitution to his victims. His construction business was liquidated to pay fines, and victim compensation with Emma's trust fund restructured to remove any money connected to criminal activity. Judge Morrison resigned from the bench after internal investigation revealed extensive campaign finance violations. The family court system implemented new oversight procedures designed to prevent similar corruption, with mandatory reporting of any financial relationships between judges and litigants. But the most important victory was personal. Danny came home to our apartment on a Saturday evening in late November carrying a single suitcase and the shy smile I'd missed so desperately during our months of separation. "Dad, I recorded something else while I was staying at Richard's house." He showed me his phone displaying an audio file labeled "Mom's Real Feelings." She didn't know I was listening, but she was talking to the baby, telling her about you and about me and about how sorry she was for letting Richard convince her to choose money over family. We listened together as Sarah's voice, captured through a bedroom wall, revealed the emotional truth she'd been afraid to express directly. Her love for Danny had never wavered, but Richard's psychological manipulation had convinced her that expressing that love meant depriving him of opportunities for advancement. "I want both my children to know their father," Sarah's recorded voice said to her unborn daughter. "I want them to understand that strength comes from integrity, not wealth. I want them to know that their mother fought to bring them back together, even when it meant losing everything else." Danny looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much but retained their essential goodness. "Are we going to be okay, Dad?" "We're going to be better than okay," I promised. "We're going to be honest with each other, support each other, and build the kind of family that nobody can manipulate or destroy." Sarah gave birth to Hope in January, a healthy baby girl who would grow up knowing both her parents loved her enough to fight for what was right instead of what was easy. Sarah and I didn't reconcile romantically, but we developed a co-parenting partnership based on mutual respect and shared commitment to our children's well-being. Emma, now 18 and legally independent, reached out to Patricia during her first semester of college. Richard's arrest had prompted questions about her childhood that led to revelations about her mother's forced disappearance. Their reunion was tentative, but genuine, built on Patricia's patient love and Emma's growing understanding of the difference between financial security and emotional manipulation. Danny thrived in his return to our normal life. His grades improved, his confidence returned, and most importantly, he learned that speaking truth about injustice was not only acceptable, but necessary. He started a support group at school for children from divorced families, sharing strategies for recognizing and resisting adult manipulation. As for me, the experience taught me that protecting your family sometimes requires courage you didn't know you possessed. Standing up to wealth and power feels impossible until you realize that love and determination can overcome any advantage that money provides. Richard's systematic destruction of families was finally exposed, his victims found justice, and his future victims were protected. But the most satisfying outcome was the simplest. Danny fell asleep in his own bed, in our modest apartment safe, in the knowledge that his father would fight for him against any force that threatened his happiness. The lesson that emerged from our ordeal was both complex and elegant. True strength doesn't come from dominating others or accumulating wealth, but from building genuine relationships based on respect, honesty, and unconditional love. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to let someone else define your worth or control your family's future. Justice isn't always swift, but it is relentless. And sometimes the very sick systems designed to help families can be corrupted by people who mistake power for virtue. When that happens, ordinary people have to find extraordinary courage to expose the truth and protect the innocent. What would you do if someone with money and connections tried to take your children away through legal manipulation and psychological abuse? Have you ever had to choose between financial security and emotional integrity in your own relationships? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if it resonated with your own experiences or concerns. Thank you for joining me in sharing Danny's story and our family's fight for justice. I hope it reminds you that no matter how powerful your opponents seem, love and truth have a strength that money cannot buy, and corruption cannot destroy. Take care of yourselves and the people you love, and remember that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with lawyers and judges, but with patience, courage, and an absolute refusal to give up on the people who matter most.